Thank you, Mr. President. The death of George Floyd while in police custody was horrifying to everyone who watched. It was made even more horrifying because it was perpetrated by an officer sworn to protect and serve. It was a demonstration of what bad policing looks like. We need to make sure that kind of misuse of power never takes place in our community. In all honesty, I have not been able to watch the nearly 9 minutes of deadly force that resulted in Mr. Floyd's death. But I watched enough of it to observe something else that disturbed me greatly. There were 3 other officers, a notably diverse group, who simply stood by and watched as George Floyd pleaded for his life. And they did nothing. How does that even happen? Then I learned that Derek Chauvin, now charged with murder, had 18 complaints filed against him with Internal Affairs. Despite that, he continued to exercise his police authority and, most frighteningly, trained other officers. That training included chokeholds and knee-to-neck restraint. This is an example not only of bad policing, but bad police leadership. Again, I ask, how did this happen? And what can we do as a community to make sure it never happens here? I've discussed with Chief McMurray the measures Huntsville has in place to prevent that kind of misuse of power that we witnessed in Minneapolis. We've talked about the safeguards we use to weed out bad officers and how we train on de-escalation tactics. We have innovative practices in place that prevent that kind of bad policing, and I look forward to having Chief McMurray share those practices with the council and the community next week, as well as the Citizens Advisory Council's report. I have confidence in Chief McMurray, our officers, and in the Police Citizens Advisory Council. They have been meeting and will continue to meet to take a broad look at not only the events of the past week, but at how our police department can better serve our community in the future. They've served us well in the past and certainly don't need this council to tell them how to do their job. I know there are those in our community who don't trust the police. We've heard from them tonight. We've heard you, and we welcome a respectful, productive community conversation about better policing. Unfortunately, that conversation seems to have been hijacked by a national narrative about police brutality that is false. And even worse, it's been fueled by charges of racism and hatred. When the peaceful and passionate NAACP protest last Wednesday was overshadowed by a smaller, less peaceful group, I heard words directed at our officers that can be qualified only as hate speech. If those same obscenities had been directed at Muslims, gays, or African Americans, they would have been soundly condemned on every social media platform. Instead, the verbal violence was posted, reposted, liked, and shared. It was social bullying, it was hypocritical, and it was just plain wrong. And in case you're wondering, posting about killing cops is not okay. Especially when, in the midst of this outcry against violence, Police Lieutenant Stephen Williams was shot to death outside of Birmingham while doing his duty. We do not honor his memory or the memory of our own Sergeant Billy Clardy by chanting FTP. If we're going to have an honest conversation about good and bad policing, then we also need to be honest about the facts. A police officer is 18 times more likely to be killed in the line of duty at the hands of a criminal than is a citizen at the hands of a police officer. And it's not about race either. The number of African Americans killed by police is less than 25% of all those killed. In fact, African Americans are much more likely to be killed by another African American than they are police. You need to just look at the data.
I'm going to call point of order. I do not want to have to remove you from the chamber. The respect is given to the dais. And right now, she is speaking. Thank you.
So if Black Lives Matter, and I believe they do, then we need to get real about the whole issue, drop the hypocrisy and the personal agendas, and have an honest conversation about what will make a real difference in this community. I applaud Councilman Keith and Captain Rice for their efforts to increase community policing in North Huntsville. They've used technology to install cameras that reduce crime and have held block parties to help citizens see the person behind the badge. Rather than defunding our police, I suggest we increase funding for community policing efforts such as these. Let's accept responsibility and work with law enforcement to ensure the safety of innocent victims, like 3-year-old Olivia Robinson, who was killed in a drive-by shooting while she sat in her North Huntsville home eating fruit snacks. Let's work with churches and community organizations to rescue not so innocent people like George Floyd, who was trapped in a cycle of drug abuse and crime. And let's learn from the horrific example of Derek Chauvin and the Minneapolis police force that ignored repeated warnings, trained officers to use lethal force, and fostered a culture of callous indifference. So, here's where we are. Yes, we will give our community a full and open accounting of the events of the past week. We owe you that. But more importantly, we will share a broader, future-focused perspective regarding what we can do to ensure the events we witnessed in Minneapolis never happen in Huntsville.